Hey guys, so good evening, everybody. How are you?
Good evening.
Hey, good evening.
So we don't have football to talk about this week, at least in the NFL, but I do want to give you a very accurate hot take that I saw this week. Take a look at the
Okay.
screen and take a look at quarterbacks that is supposed to say can't win the Super Bowl, and you look on your left side, fifth down. Dwayne Haskins is definitely a quarterback that can currently not win the Super Bowl. That is a very correct take by Colin Cowherd and friends. Yes, Dwayne Haskins, dead for at least a year, definitely cannot win the Super Bowl. So there you go. That's the most accurate hot take that you'll ever see out there.
I need another reason not to like Colin Coward.
I think there's a lot of reasons
Yeah.
not to like a lot of people, but just beautifully poor taste there. I'm Steve Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan.
I'm Anthony Strait.
And this is on the Sports Lines Midsummer Edition. We're going to talk a lot of different things today. We'll talk, we like to talk about winners. They're fun to talk about. But tonight we have so many losers. New York baseball, the U.S. women's soccer team, the Angelos family. And because I don't want a depressed audience, I'll throw in a winner or two. One. But that's it. But now we start from losers to the lost Pac-12 time. It's time for conference math. I love math. I love conference math. So here we go. Take 12 teams in the Pac-12 to start about a few years ago, minus USC and UCLA. They're leaving for the Big Ten next year. Now it's going to be the Pac-10. Then came the last 2 weeks. Oof. Minus Colorado, which will be rejoining the Big 12 in 2024-25, Pac-9. Arizona joining the Big 12 that same season, Pac-8. Hey, that used to be called Pac-8. Oregon and Washington joining the Big 10 in that same season as well, Pac-6. Uh-oh. And then ending last week with Arizona State and Utah also going to the Big 12. Yeesh. Now it's in one academic season, the Pac-12 is basically Stanford, Cal, who are negotiating with the ACC, hasn't worked out yet, Washington State, and Oregon State. Yes, kids, the island of misfit toys is here. Okay, Jay, what or who's to blame for this cratering of an institution in college sports that goes back to 1910?
Okay, I mean, as a USC fan, this pains me even more than the Trojans move to the Big Ten. It's disgusting. It's vile. It's further proof that all university presidents truly care about is the payout from a media rights deal focused on college football dollars. And to hell with what it means for the majority of the student athletes in every other sport they purport to care about. Greed, hubris, and incompetence are why a 108-year-old conference will cease to exist after 2023, and it need not had to happen. Think about this, guys. On November 12th of 2011, ESPN's College Game Day was live from the Stanford University campus, where that night the undefeated and third-ranked Cardinal would be playing the sixth-ranked Oregon Ducks. The Pac-12 would finish that regular season with 3 of the top 6 ranked teams in the country. That same year, the league would sign what was then the richest TV contract in college sports history, 12 years, $3 billion with a B dollars. That this same storied conference is, for all intents and purposes, extinct just 12 years later seems completely unimaginable. And yet here we are, and the wounds that did it are almost entirely self-inflicted. You can track the point of origin for all this back to the day that former Commissioner Larry Scott enacted his ill-advised strategy to open a ridiculously expensive conference headquarters in San Francisco and then launched the Pac-12 networks without a proven media partner like ESPN, and do so at the expense of adding almost half the Big 12 into the league. Turnabout now fair play, right? It's well documented just how the 7-channel model struggled to gain any type of distribution and never came close to delivering its promised and projected revenue numbers. It became the albatross from which the member schools would never escape, and it, along with other stupid decisions, eventually cost Scott his job. But it wasn't just Scott who's to blame for this mess. As recently as 2015, the conference had a deal in hand to finally get the Pac-12 networks on DirecTV, which would have solved the whole distribution problem. But the university presidents, led by Arizona State's Michael Crow, rejected it. If this was the SEC, those presidents would have been cleaning out their offices the next day. but apparently that's not how they do things out on the left coast. Unfortunately, Scott's successor as Pac-12 commissioner, George Kliavkoff, well, he made things worse, not better. There are those who say it may be unfair to blame him for USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12 for their Rose Bowl conference rival, the Big Ten. Side note, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot happens to the granddaddy of all bowl games after that season. Rabbi, I know you have the answer. You can give it to us later. But I'm not one of them. I completely lay the blame at his feet. If two of the founding members of the conference who play in the nation's #2 media market are that unhappy and that concerned with things, A, how did you not know? And two, if you did, how did you not do anything and everything possible to alleviate their concerns and unhappiness so that they would stay? If a commissioner's most important job is negotiating a media rights deal, then Kliavkoff blew that one big time twice, and he did it publicly, misplaying the handling of negotiations with ESPN to the point that they gave their money to the Big 12. And they tried to replace that with a deal that had only Apple Plus and no regular TV component. Really? Are you kidding me? Check out this nugget from the Pac-12 Media Day last month, where he stated that more Pac-12 teams being poached by other conferences was not a concern. Here's the quote. The longer we wait for a deal, the better our options get. Our schools are committed to each other into the Pac-12. We'll get our media rights deal done. We'll announce the deal. I think the realignment that's going on in college athletics will come to an end for this cycle. The truth is we've got bigger fish to fry. Actually, George, that was exactly the fish you had to fry. And if you had, maybe we wouldn't be here in the middle of the ashes and ruins of what Bill Walton will soon no longer be able to call the Conference of Champions. Maybe for the sake of tradition, longstanding rivalries that transcend just football, geography, and the other sports, most of which play more than once a week and don't have the resources given to the football program, we accept that we're finally at the enough is enough point and just tell college football to just go do their own thing. Take the 60 or so more teams from what's left of the conferences previously called the Power Five and go form an NFL-like league away from the NCAA rather. You know deep down that you really want to football and leave the rest of college sports, starting with basketball, who you can imagine is really pissed off at how they weren't consulted on any of this. Leave them all in actual conferences that make actual sense both geographically and economically, as opposed to what they've devolved into. The Big Ten will have 18 teams when it adds the 4 from the West Coast. The SEC will have 16 teams with Texas and Oklahoma. Most of the teams in these two leagues won't even play each other, which is the very definition of a college conference. Hell, the SEC won't even budge off an 8-game conference schedule to help that along. Nah, they just can't give up those cupcake games against directional schools. The demise of the Pac-12 is just the latest proof that cash TV money in football are what's ruling college sports. Anyone saying otherwise is either a university president or a hypocrite, likely both. And it's why realignment based on those things is killing what college sports used to be about. Passionate regional fan bases, longstanding traditions, and storied rivalries. And while that greed rewards just a select few and renders the rest almost irrelevant. You cannot tell me that the people who made these conference realignment decisions really thought it through for all sports, because if they had, I doubt they'd have jumped in with both feet in a New York minute. Nope, they did it with football money dancing in their eyes, and the rest of the student athletes and all the other sports will be the ones who suffer the most for that greed. Maybe if we applied the Notre Dame model across college sports, competing in one conference for other sports and doing something different for football, the Pac-12 would still be a viable conference. Hell, the Irish are a football independent, albeit with 5 ACC opponents annually and a full ACC member for everything else. There are a couple of really great quotes from two of the senior college football guys at The Athletic that sum up the demise of the Pac-12 and the state of the sport of college football in general in the wake of that demise. Here they are. The first one is from David Uben, who's a senior writer for college football. Here's the quote. I don't buy the idea that college football is destroyed or dying. I suspect the sport will become even more popular at the top, but it lost a lot of its soul on Friday and is becoming something entirely different and not better for the people who play the sport. The second one is from Stuart Mandel. He's the senior columnist and editor-in-chief for college football at The Athletic. The Pac-12, like the Southwest Conference, remember that one, the WAC and the Big East before it, is passing on from the major college football earth. Cause of death, gross failure of leadership. Or, and this is mine, to paraphrase Goose after Maverick's hubris, there's that word again, got them killed on a Top Gun training run, the NCAA regrets to inform you that your conference is dead because their leaders were stupid.
You are absolutely 100% correct on everything you said about the Pac-12. It is a sad state of affairs, and it's just really just not adjusting to the times. The quotes that you heard from Pac-12's what wound up being their final media day are just very pathetic, and I have to say, it's dumb, it's ignorant, and it's just a way of basically not paying attention to the landscape of sports. It is honestly nothing you've said in that is incorrect, and I think that yeah, football. And one thing that really shocks me out of all of this is football is more lopsided than it's ever been at the top.
Yep.
Which is why when we have a playoff, I'm very interested to see how it works. But it's like there is just not a lot of like dominant.
Oh, and you heard the
teams.
latest on the playoff, right, Rabbi?
Yeah, that the SEC is trying to get more.
Is now advocating that they open it up to have more at-large bids available because now one conference is going to be extinct by the time the 12-team playoff goes into
which is exactly what you should do for your conference. I mean, again, is this stuff greedy? Absolutely. Unfortunately, though, this is the best way to make money, and I just don't think the Pac-12 was ever thinking about the teams and the schools' well-being. Yes. Now, other schools have suffered about this, but unfortunately, the landscape that we're in, and also NIL, is the reason why we're in just a very football state of affairs here. I'm very interested to see what the future holds. There's so many geographic fuck-ups that are going to come with this, and there are some embarrassing stuff. Like, have you seen Rutgers in football over the last 5-6 years? They're not a Big Ten school. They could easily be an independent, but they're making that money, and that's all that matters. This is all a money thing. I understand the move that the Pac-12 president pretty much had to make because they were basically on the Titanic. And the Titanic was sinking very quickly without the captain ever noticing that it was below water.
I will say this, and I'm kind of shocked because all this time, these head coaches and the athletic directors led me to believe that NIL is destroying college sports. Wow, why am I not surprised?
It's destroying college sports, by the way, it's destroying college sports for them only because they don't want the players to have power.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it is. But I mean, Jay said everything absolutely correct. It's about the TV money, and we saw this with the original Big East and teams leaving that conference. And you mentioned Rutgers going from the Big East to the Big Ten. They're not a Big Ten school. Let's just be honest. I mean, the geographical lineup just didn't make any sense. Like, okay, you are in literally the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. How does that fit the Big Ten, which is mainly the Midwest of the United States?
Because they wanted the New York market, and they got the NCAA, and they got their Big East tournament to MSG for some reason, albeit a week before everybody else.
Yeah, I was actually at that tournament, believe it or not. I was at the opening day of the Big Ten tournament. But here's the thing, too, and my question is, what happens to the remaining 4 teams in the Pac-12? I mean, do they get sucked up by another conference now by like the Mountain West? That's talk that's come up a little bit. But I mean, just seeing a conference that's been around for over 100 years just literally evaporate in a 2-week span. I never seen anything like this. And of course, it's about the TV money. I mean, it's the reason why Notre Dame is not trying to be in a conference when it comes to football.
They don't need to.
They don't need to.
NBC's give them a lot of money. A lot of money.
NBC's been giving them money, lots of money for decades now to broadcast Notre Dame football, and they don't have to split that money, excuse me, with any other school if they're in a conference. They keep that revenue for themselves. So that's one big thing. But also when you look at it like this, with the Pac-12, what they messed up with the TV deal is the fact that they just, and like Jay said, they didn't have any broad distribution for that Pac-12 network. So how are you going to watch games? How are you going to get the conference out there, particularly when it came to something like, I don't know, the college football playoff and the main part of the United States, pretty much much of the United States can't watch games because much of the Pac-12 is playing, at least in the Eastern time zone, 10 o'clock or later, for the games. So I mean, like I said, I was stunned to see all this happening, but we're seeing this a lot now. We've been seeing schools kind of jumping from conference to conference and following the TV money, and the big TV contracts are in college football, and we're seeing that now more so than anything. And now you have a college football playoff, the money and the revenue that's going to bring in and generate, and also depending on how many teams from each conference can actually get in, and that puts more exposure to that conference in particular. So it's kind of like it's the wild west of money making one-on-one if you're an athletic director to these schools. The unfortunate, it is an unfortunate thing though, because obviously I mentioned the Big East, and we talked about the history with that and how they were able to kind of salvage just being a basketball only conference. In the case of the Pac-12, they were so greedy about the football money that they forgot that they had a lot of prestige within their own conference, within other sports. I mean, you think about the college basketball side of it. The UCLA team is the greatest college basketball team ever assembled, and we've seen great runs with Oregon and even
Arizona,
and we've seen these in years past. We've seen it in lesser sports like volleyball as well. So it was definitely a short-sighted situation where they would just focus on one sport, but not taking into consideration how the other sports that these schools were involved in were going to be affected. And now the question is going to be what's going to happen with the rest of the remaining 4 teams, because Stanford, Cal, Washington State, and Oregon State, I mean, they are not the biggest names when you think about Oregon State is sharing. Yeah, that Oregon State is literally the neighbors to the Oregon Ducks. Washington State is literally the neighbors to the more popular and more known Washington Huskies.
Yeah.
And even Cal. I mean, at least to me, the only time I watched Cal on a football field was when Marshawn Lynch was dropped. Yeah, when they're playing Stanford.
And the big game, one of the best rivalries in college football history.
And Rabbi, you use the word lopsided to describe the state of college football, and that's pretty much spot on, because if you think about it, all that happened here is that the top end of the Big Ten got better. And now, granted, plenty of, the networks now have, all the other schools are still going to get paid. They're going to get their cash. They're going to get that bag. But do you think the networks that are now part of their broadcast deals, do you think they now have even less incentive to show matchups between the middle to the bottom of that conference and forget about seeing them on the actual main network? You'll be lucky if you see them on the cable offshoot or whatnot. And honestly, if they don't need to. Now they have more inventory of top brand names than they know what to do with, which is what they wanted all along.
Well, they also have the inventory of, if you have a network, you get a lot of space. Like the Big Ten is going to be all across 3 different networks. So I think in taking that,
owns 61%.
Yeah,
a 61% stake in the Big Ten network. So if you don't think that they had something to do with this,
of course they did. Everybody did.
You are kidding yourself.
And whatever CBS games that they don't have, they'll go to NBC, who also has a piece of that pie. And what other games they don't have, they go to CBS. It's all about the money. They'll get the exposure because there's, believe it or not, 5,000 different networks for people to watch these games on. But the state of how it actually is being played is going to be another statement. All right, let's move on. The Women's World Cup is currently going on in Australia and New Zealand. And when I was talking about, yeah, well, it still is. And when I was talking about last show that maybe the rest of the world was caught up to the U.S. soccer team, big time yes on that. Big time yes. Thanks to a shootout loss on Sunday morning to Sweden, the worst 6 a.m. wake up after going to bed after a night out at 2:30 a.m. ever. Thanks, ladies. The U.S. women's team secured their worst ever Women's World Cup finish. Out of the previous 8 World Cups, never missed the quarterfinals, never missed the semis, never even finished outside of the top 3. The old guard of Megan Rapinoe and Julie Ertz have both now officially retired from national play, and there's probably more to come. So they go out on a very sour note.
Yep.
Anthony, your takeaway from the Women's World Cup run of a team that didn't score a goal for essentially 3 full games of action on their way out of the Nightmare Down Under.
Yeah, over 200 minutes. I mean, definitely the longest drought in the United States.
240, I believe, was the
yeah,
number.
it was. Yeah, I'm happy we're doing this show on a Thursday night, and that's because I got a little nauseous of all the armchair quarterbacks of the world, and the morons named Bill Simmons. On top of that, and that pocket of patriots that do themselves a rose parade when the United States women's team lost Sunday morning, but lost it, and the loss in all this, and this is, I kind of tell people did not really pay attention to what was going on with this team, is that this was one of the youngest teams going into the World Cup. And I remember, Rabbi, I was texting before the first match against Vietnam, and I was saying the youth and inexperience of this team does worry me a little bit, because there were so many key players missing. I mean, you look at the roster makeup, 13 players were playing in the first World Cup. 10 of them were playing in the first international tournament of any kind. So the inexperience on this team was pretty striking when you think about the old guard and most of the roster being under 30 years old. I mean, you look at the young players: Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, Naomi Germer, who played extraordinarily well on the back line, Savannah DeMello, Alyssa Thompson, who was all of 18 years old, Alana Cook, Ashley Sanchez. They're all under 25 years old. And then you look at some of the other players: Lisa Horan is 29, Rosa Bell is 28, Andy Silva is 27, Emily Sonnet, who
and LaBelle didn't play this entire World Cup.
Yeah, and LaBelle did not play that Sweden game too. Remember, she had the 2 yellow cards and had to sit this game out. So that was definitely a big blow to the United States going into that game. But the inexperience is one thing. They went into the World Cup missing several key players through the injury as well. We talked about
starting with Becky Sauerbrunn.
Becky Sauerbrunn, who was a key member of that back line, and it kind of forced Julie Ertz moving to that position instead of playing her regular midfield position. And the offense really did look inconsistent as far as the attack, or even breaking down an opposing team's defense on that side of the field. But the biggest blow was definitely Mallory Swanson's telling her patellar back in April in a friendly that really kind of hamstrung this roster to the point where, and obviously, Jay, I'll leave the coaching part of that to you and your take. But Katarina Macau is another one that was missing. So there was a lot of players that were missing off the team. Christian Press, Toby Heath, that was on the 2019 teams that were not available to injury. Sam Muse, Kristen Muse's sister, was not available also. So and Albie Dalkemper as well. So these are some big key members that was on the previous 2 World Cups for the United States that was very key for Jill Ellis that Anniversary did not have available to him. So I don't know how much that forced his hand as far as going with more younger players, but you kind of felt like the inexperience was going to catch up because of the big moment and the exposure of being on an international tournament of this magnitude. I mean, we saw Sophia Smith with a chance to send the United States through on penalty kicks, sail her wide. And you wonder if maybe someone more experienced would have been a little more calm and more mature, more composed to make that kick, and to keep it within the goal. So those are two things that a lot of people overlooked. A lot of people had not paid attention to, and it felt like to me that the biggest enemy for the United States, this group of women, wasn't really necessarily on the pitch. It was the expectations of living up to the United States, the gold standard that the last two previous World Cup teams have set.
I'm gonna say though, there's one thing about living up to the standard. There's another thing in only scoring 3 goals versus Vietnam when the Netherlands scored an easy 7. There's one thing about living up towards standards, and there's one thing without scoring a goal in 248 minutes of World Cup play. There's a big difference. I'm not saying you're wrong. You're absolutely right. But this is a huge disappointment, and there wasn't no tempered expectations. There might have been tempered expectations for other reasons, which we'll talk about in a second, but Jay, just the perfect storm of everything that could go wrong did go wrong here for the U.S. women.
Yeah, and to kind of as far as the expectations go, and I mean, granted, that's up there, but here's the thing: those expectations are based on a standard of excellence that we saw over the previous 2 cups.
Of course.
And as Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin is fond of saying, the standard is the standard. And with that, so in terms of what my takeaway from this is, there seemed to be a lack of identity for this team. I mean, we knew this national team was a bridge team, a bridge between the generation that won those last 2 World Cups for the U.S. and the one that we hope will eventually win the next one. What we didn't expect this to be was a bridge too far for this current roster to cross, but that's how it turned out. The thing that stood out was the glaring lack of offense after the 3-0 win over Vietnam. The U.S. women's national team hit the back of the net just once in actual play after that in their 1-1 draw with the Netherlands in their second group stage match, and none in their last 2 matches, group stage versus Portugal and quarterfinals against Sweden, both of which were 0-0 draws, with the U.S. getting bounced from the tournament on penalty kicks in the thinnest of margins, as we've all seen on that, Hawkeye-type technology. Then again, with what we saw from this team, I'm not sure they deserve to advance to the semis. They look a wee bit more like what we've come to expect from a 2-time defending World Cup champion, in that last game. To some extent, yes, but while this team can hang their hat on the terrific defense they played, clean sheets in 3 of their 4 matches and 1 total goal allowed in regular play and only 2 total shots on goal. High-powered offense is what we've come to expect from the U.S. women's national team especially over the last 2 World Cups. And in that regard, this team was sorely lacking as they went, as we said, those last 248 consecutive minutes of game time without a goal, 120 of those minutes coming against Sweden, despite 22 shots, 583 passes, and a 77% passing accuracy. I mean, look, guys, we can kick the ball around all we want about whether Vlatko Andonovski was in over his head based on his arguably questionable decisions regarding squad selection, in-game substitutions, or lack thereof, as 9 of the 20 players on the roster played over 87% of all possible minutes. 4 players got fewer than 20, and 2 didn't even see the field at all. As well as, the team's tactical approach, which I'm not sure anyone has really been able to nail down. We can talk about how much of the U.S. women's national team's surprising lack of offense is due to his decision-making as opposed to the injuries that Anthony talked about, to bad luck, or players not performing like the back of their trading card, or even the refereeing to a certain extent, as the case could be made that the quality of refereeing had at least some impact on all 3 group stage matches. I mean, in terms of players not living up to reputation, it's easy to start with Alex Morgan, as she failed to score a single goal despite leading the Americans in shots with 17 and expected goals with 3.05. 6 of her 17 shots were on target, but each resulted in a save by the goaltender. That placement rate of 35.3% ranked 30th among the 37 strikers who put at least 2 shots on goal in the tournament's first 3 or 4 games. Not what you'd expect from one of the best goal scorers in U.S. women's national team history. But Sophia Smith also, she went MIA after her solid opener against Vietnam, and despite looking like they might break through at any moment, neither Trinity Rodman nor Lynn Williams put one in the net either. But if the U.S. women's national team is to rebound from this defeat and return to its previous level of success, they'll need to find something that was glaringly absent down under: a soccer identity. Who are they, and who will they be going forward with the next generation, especially now that it's glaringly obvious that, as Rabbi and Anthony said, the rest of the female soccer playing world has finally caught up to the U.S., much like what happened at the 2004 Olympics, when the previously dominant men's USA basketball team only managed a bronze because the rest of the world had learned their lessons from 1992 and had finally caught up to the U.S. in that sport. For all their dominance in winning the last 2 World Cups, there's always been a question about what their soccer identity and philosophy is. The previous U.S. women's national teams have been built around the players' mental toughness, fitness levels, and just flat out belief in their abilities and in one another. But these are all universal concepts which can apply to any sport. Anson Dorrance, who coached the U.S. to their first Women's World Cup win in 1991, once explained the team's style of soccer as follows. Here's the quote, which I found very interesting. What we had an opportunity to do, which was unique, was developing our game within the sort of cultural and athletic mores of the United States. I was coaching entirely within the parameters of our own culture. Because we had no footballing culture, we couldn't pride ourselves on our sophistication or our creativity, but we had this relentless, irrepressible American spirit with a confidence that belied our capability. Makes you think, right? And that approach persists today. In soccer terms, it comes down to a couple of concepts: one-on-one dribbling out wide and hard running from midfield. That scheme works when you're superior individually and in terms of levels of fitness, but without those 2 advantages, what do you fall back on? And this is where this team struggles. The team managers who followed Dorrance focused on winning, and obviously there's been some success there, but that doesn't qualify as a philosophy or give the team an identity. It's something easier to hide when you're winning back-to-back World Cups, but not so much when you're bounced in the quarters, and that major flaw is exposed. Major flaw. You can throw the blame wherever you want, but it comes down to this. This edition of the U.S. women's national team didn't really know who or what they are. They'll need to find out before 2027 rolls around.
Or before 2024, because they're going to have to go for the Olympics. They're going to want to get some Olympics qualifying in there.
Fair enough. I'm giving them the long-term goal.
It can't be too long, considering the fact that they need international experience.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I want to add this too. The coaching was definitely questionable in the matches. I mean, the substitutions and the lack of substitutions, but more of when the substitutions were made, what has
listen.
I mean,
you can't.
There's another thing too. But there was one like in the group play. They were going to the 4-3-3, and the starters were Morgan, Robin, and Sophia Smith. They're pretty much all the same player. None of them really had that expertise in servicing and setting up other players. They're all goal scorers in their respective right. So when especially the game against the match against Portugal, when Sophia Smith got into the box, she's double teamed. She doesn't have that experience to maybe set someone up for a better shot or work the ball around. And you saw that when she would turn the ball over quite a bit, Morgan would take shots from really bad angles, and Robin really were able to use the speed and to get shots going. But they were too far. They were from distance. She missed a few shots, and I'm watching the matches. I'm just like that we didn't have enough forwards on the team to make any tactical substitutions.
What, you're American now saying we? Oh wait, never mind.
No, I'm just you know what I mean. But I was just saying that Enovinsky's makeup of this team really was unbalanced. But you saw it in the matchups as well, and that 4-3-3 scheme really actually exposed a lot of what Jay said, a lot of the flaws.
Let me simplify it even more for you without saying 4-3-3 every 5 minutes. In the game against Sweden,
good, okay?
It does, but let me just make it even simpler for you. In the game against Sweden, when he subbed out Alex Morgan, who was struggling, and you could make a case could have easily been benched for the next game against Japan if they had made it. You don't sub her out at that point of the game because of the fact that you might need somebody who's been in pressure situations to take penalty kicks. You certainly don't sub her out for a person who was looking tired a lot during the World Cup and whose setting ability in Megan Rapinoe wasn't there. And you also don't put people in at the 119th minute of a game just to take penalty kicks, because that's a spot that you never want to be in. So I'm going to say the failure of the leader was one of the reasons why this team lost, and his services are no longer going to be needed. If he ever coaches another game for the U.S. women, that's a big mistake. Big mistake. But some things I would have to say is just look at the teams that are left and the way that they play ball. England has struggled at times during this World Cup, but they have probably the most talent out of any team that's left. Australia, you got the home side, and they were even playing without Sam Kerr until a couple days ago, and she looked fantastic in her round of 16 game. Spain looks fast. The Netherlands have the experience. Colombia has an 18-year-old who might be the best player in women's soccer. Just look at these teams, and you might realize that some of the best players that are being developed are not here or not in this area. And we've made it. Let me finish here. Mm-hmm. We've made it about men's. We've always said about men's soccer that we have no room to develop players because of the fact that the rest of the world was always ahead of us in that. We're getting a little better at that. The reverse now for women's soccer. And as I said before, Jen, the Olympics are going to be a big thing for this women's soccer team because they need international experience before 2027, and that's where they're not going to be in the same position. They could be in this position again, even trying harder than any other team.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things, Rabbi, you and I talked about on the phone, when we were, starting to kind of like lay the bones down for this show, and we were talking about this segment, was how the European and, South American leagues have finally gone all in, with the investment in the women's,
because of the U.S. by the way,
right? The women's versions of their men's leagues. You see it in all of South America. You're seeing it all across Europe. Italy, Spain, France, England. You're seeing, and they're putting dollars in developing their women's sides now, because as you said, it's because of the U.S. And now, the tables are turned. And just like what happened to the men's basketball team after 2004, you're going to have to step back. You're going to have to reassess. And you're going to have to figure some stuff out if you want to return to the elite level that you previously held.
And also, someone pointed this out to me online. 53 players from the NWSL clubs are actually playing in the World Cup, not for the United States. Right. So that's another thing too. How the talent level has really gotten a lot closer than ever before.
And you're seeing a lot of people from Chelsea on the women's game and the clubs overseas. And the NWSL isn't necessarily the most well-run organization as we've seen in the past. So
no, but these European players,
absolutely, they're coming
in the NWSL. The advantage, it kind of gives them advantage because they've seen most of the U.S. women's players throughout that regular season. They're no longer,
to be fair,
they're no longer, people that they don't see until the first national competition rolls around.
To be fair, they've seen them all of their lives as well.
Granted, but playing against these people takes some of that aura away.
Okay, Anthony, focus on the show.
Yeah, sorry,
not on Spain, Netherlands. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Well, Spain just scored, so they're 1-0 on a penalty kick from a handball. Sorry about that.
All right, guys, let's move on. The New York Yankees celebrated the trade deadline last week with a big move. Not the White Sox guy. We're not going to talk about that. Unfortunately, that move was placing pitcher Domingo Germán on the restricted list due to alcohol abuse. 2023 New York baseball. Pretty much an afterthought right now in the division race are the Yankees, and they're still 5 games out of the final wild cards being currently held by the
Oh, they
Toronto Blue
picked up
Jays.
half a game because they didn't play tonight.
That's the only way they seemingly can pick up half a game these days. Anyway, they didn't buy. They didn't really sell. So I guess they're giving August and September baseball a try. Jay, your thoughts on the trade snooze fest / deadline for the Bronx Bombers?
All right. Rabbi, as I told you, earlier this evening, I got a lot to say, and most of it's going to be in rant form. So,
whoa, hold on a second. Let me get comfortable because this is gonna be good. Okay, you go ahead, Jay.
Here we go, because I'm about to get into it. All right. Yeah, because this may be the last time I wear a shirt that says New York Yankees on it, because after today, we may not have a need to talk about them until well after baseball's over. Here we go. So
Post-Mortems are coming.
Yeah, just like they weren't last year's deadline, the Yankees are a team stuck in no teams land. They're not good enough to be sellers. They weren't good enough to be sellers at the trade deadline. Not that I think ownership would ever allow it. After all, this team is still run by a Steinbrenner, but they weren't good enough to be buyers either, as they don't have a lot of assets that other teams would want. And the ones that the teams ask for are not ones that the Yankees are willing to part with, especially when the players available don't really move the needle and fill in the glaring holes on their roster. Yeah, it's an interesting note by The Athletic in their 2023 MLB deadline takeaway piece. Here's the quote. The players the Yankees could have dealt away varied from the brittle, Harrison Bader, inconsistent, Gleyber Torres, to overpriced, Anthony Rizzo. A robust market did not await players this flawed. End quote. And the minor league assets were of no help in making deals, because the ones that every team wants are the ones the Yankees are unwilling to part with, and the ones they were willing to part with are the ones no one else wants. This is something that Yankee fans who call into WFAN and rage about, GM Brian Cashman's seeming inability to upgrade the team at the deadline have never understood. Look, the Yankees GM was spot on when he spoke to the media after the deadline passed and said that they'd obviously rather be in a more defined position, like being 3.5 games up in the postseason race or 10 games out, which would, either of which would give the organization a clearer picture of the team, but that's not where they are. He went on to say that they went into the period leading up to the deadline looking to be opportunistic buyers or sellers. But as the team floundered on the field, they began to take a more cautious approach, especially as teams that they were talking to, who started out as sellers at the beginning of those conversations, changed to buyers at the end of those conversations due to improved performance of their own on the field. And he was right again for what the Yankees needed. There wasn't a deep pool of options available to them that made sense both from a financial standpoint, taking on salary, and or a baseball standpoint worth parting with their higher-end prospects. And that, plus the feeling that this veteran team has better baseball in them, I know it's been something they've been holding on to all year, despite not even showing it even once Aaron Judge returned to the lineup, is why the Yankees elected to, as Cash said, to stay the course, as opposed to, as he also said, taking a wrecking ball to it. Yes, the Yankees are doubling down on guys like Rizzo, before we knew about the concussion issue, Stanton, LeMahieu, Donaldson, et al., starting to play like the back of their baseball cards, even when the scoreboard and the box score says they don't seem to resemble the backs of those cards anymore. But what choice do they have, seeing as they're stuck with these underperforming veterans who hope to figure it out for the rest of this season and subsequent ones, because no team is taking on the rest of their contracts unless the Yankees decide to eat significant money, which I do not see Hal Steinbrenner doing. Even if the Yankees wanted to buy at the deadline, no singular player from another team was going to turn things around because of those high-priced veterans and their collective downturn this season. Yes, the Yankees might have a solve for their left field mess in the minors in 22-year-old Everson Pereira. He's ranked number 51 on the Athletics MLB scouting guru Keith Law's midseason top 60 prospect list. Pierre Pereira, who put up a 908 OPS with 10 homers in 46 games at AA Somerset before being promoted to AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre, where he slashed 336, 385, 571 in 107 plate appearances. He's also considered a good defender. Who would he be an improvement over the likes of Isaiah Kiner-Falefa or Billy McKinney or Jake Bauer? Would calling him up give him big league exposure that could speed up his development for 2024? The answers are possibly and probably, but there's a reason the Yankees are usually deliberate with bringing their prospects up one rung at a time, Anthony Volpe accepted, And that's so that they can adjust to the differences in the game at each level. And in Pereira's case, so he can work on reducing that 31% strikeout rate and get comfortable transitioning from center field, where he previously played all of his time in the minors, to a corner outfield spot, like left field, where he's more likely to play at the big league level. But just as no singular player on another team was going to turn around, neither is promoting Pereira to the Bronx. Was this a troubling deadline for the Yankees? Yes, and it has once again sparked concerns about the direction of the team. They didn't get better for the future, and they didn't address any of this season's problems. They mostly stood pat, which I'm sure has those Yankee fans I referenced earlier screaming on WFAN that doing so was the worst course they could have taken, and it's a failure by Brian Cashman in the front office. That's a really easy knee-jerk hot take, and it completely misses the points that Cashman made in his post-deadline presser. A lot of my fellow Yankee fans are from the generation that saw Hal's father spend ridiculous amounts of money and seemingly get any player he wanted when he wanted them, and they've passed that down to subsequent generations. And that's all well and good in terms of free agency. Though, as Cashman has reminded us time and again, Hal is not his father. He's a lot more fiscally responsible. There is an actual budget, so there is a limit to just how many Brinks trucks he'll back up to get a player. But when it comes to the trade deadline, you need two teams to make a trade, and you can't make another team part with a player who will fill a hole on this team just because you're the New York Yankees. This is what happens when you're stuck in no teams land like this year's Yankees are. Does it suck? 1,000%. Is it going to get better by September? I'm not holding my breath. Is it completely unfixable for next season? TBD. But some tough decisions may need to be made this offseason if the Yankees want to make sure they don't waste yet another season of what's left of Aaron Judge's and Garrett Cole's primes.
It's kind of funny when you think about everything and just how the Yankees season has gone, and just I want to talk about that in a second. But Anthony, again, Jay said it perfectly. I'm agreeing way too much with you tonight. This is a no man's land team right now, and in a division full of sharks in the AL East, they're kind of a guppy.
Yeah, I'd say when Jay asked me what was my angle for the Yankees, I just said a whole lot of nothing. I literally meant there's a whole lot of nothing. I mean,
there isn't. There is nothing.
I mean, you look at the Yankees roster, and it's like, okay, if you were a rival executive, even looking for a rental, who would you take if a guy not named Aaron Judge? Because
right. Or Garrett Cole.
Or Garrett Cole. I mean, you look at it like this. The Yankees needed any kind of an offensive jolt. The 29th in team batting average. So it says every day, and they looked even worse when Judge was out, and now we're just back in the lineup. They still can't hit. I watched the game last night when they played the White Sox. I don't ever recall seeing the Yankees team look so lifeless, and a team that's still in the playoff race, which is I've never seen this before. And you look at it like this: is that I'm reading an article off The Athletic, and let me just see if I can find it real quick. Mark Kelly basically said that a rival executive basically said that the Yankees were just waiting around to get blown away by a deal. But if you're an AL GM or even an actually GM, what pieces would you take from this Yankee lineup? I mean,
right.
There's nothing there. I mean, they are literally the definition. They're what I call, like, when you see an NBA team, they're not good. They're not good enough to be a threat in the playoffs, but they're not bad enough to tank and just get a first-round pick and move on. That's what the Yankees are. They're literally stuck in no man's land because they have a Asian roster that's underperforming outside of the two prominent all-stars and Judge and Garrett Cole. They don't really have any pieces to offer up, and because I like the George Steinbrenner and Jay, the generation you mentioned that grew up and with the George Steinbrenner win at all costs mentality. There is a thing called a luxury tax in play with Major League Baseball. You don't want to be paying tax money on a dollar that's going to the other teams with the sole purpose of beating you. That is the one thing you cannot do. But and I understand how Son brothers thought process in that regard, but at the same time, the Yankees just didn't have any real pieces to go. There was no direction that they can go after. As far as the trade deadline and people who was available, there was nobody that everybody talking to the buyers pretty much, and even if the Padres, who I thought should have just said forget it and became sellers and got rid of Juan Soto, they decided to hold on. The Cubs decided to go all in. That was a team a month ago that was looking at being sellers, and the Diamondbacks, a team I had bragged about during our All-Star show, completely falling apart, and they were going all in. So there wasn't much of a market for the Yankees to even get a rental, but they didn't even have any pieces to offer up neither. Like the Yankees are literally stuck as a middling team in a division that has just gotten just it is
Younger.
like you said, younger. And they've gotten much younger, and it just really gotten. It's become an uphill climb for the Yankees just to stay in the wild card hunt right now.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, I referenced, and literally those comments that I made about Cash talking, The Athletic had a snippet of his post-deadline press conference, and I literally transcribed the things that I listened to. He said, that whole thing about teams that he started talking to at the beginning of the trade deadline period that were seemingly all ready to sell, and then all of a sudden they start winning, and they now start thinking of themselves in terms of buyers. One of the teams that comes to mind, and it's the first one that jumped into mind, I don't know about you guys, was the Cubs, because you got to believe that at the point in which conversations may have started between the Yankees and the Cubs about possibly trying to get Bellinger, the Cubs were nosediving, they were free falling. And then somewhere along the line, or in the middle of, the trade deadline period, they reel off 8 straight guys, and suddenly they were competitive again. And then all of a sudden, any talk about Clay Bellinger being for sale is off the table. So you got to, what more? I don't know. There's nothing that
there's also no one player that could turn the Yankees around right now, because there's
too many
so
guys
many
not
flaws.
performing.
There's so many guys not performing. But here's one thing that, and yes, Jay insulted me by saying you had a WFAN like statement when I said it, but I said it because this team needs a direction, and it's not just this season. Since the middle, so in 2021, we're gonna say post-pandemic, 2021, this was a 92-70 team. They lost in the wild card game. In the first half of 2022, gangbusters. But since July of 2022 up until now, this team is 2 games over 500. I'm shocked that they're 2 games over 500. That is an over 170 to 180 game pace. This is who this team is. And they kind of just stood on their laurels last offseason, I think, when maybe a little more needed to be done, when a lot of that team was actually on a high. And I know that obviously a lot of that money was going to go to Aaron Judge free agency, and it was about keeping Aaron Judge. And they spent 8 years, $162 million on Carlos Rodon. That did not work out, at least for this season, and that was a biggie. In the whole state of things.
No one saw
Severino basically becoming,
as he really said, the worst pitcher in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of people have said that the worst pitcher in Major League Baseball this year, but Severino definitely has a case. This team is just, they need a direction, and they kind of probably needed that direction a lot more last year because they had fool's gold as a mirage of being a team that beat the Cleveland Guardians in a 5-game series, winning Game 5 at home, and then immediately losing in 4 to a much better and more talented team in the Astros. And honestly, even going into the season when this team, at least in the first half, was around that wild card picture a lot, you have to realize Baltimore, Toronto, Tampa, Houston, Seattle, and Texas. I can name 6 teams to you right off the bat that have a better future right now than the New York Yankees do. And that's just saying, and that's just thinking off the top of my head. You can make cases for Boston, Minnesota, and even the Angels if they keep Ohtani. So
I was. By the way, Rabbi, I'll ask you guys this because you are the resident Yankee fans on the show, and one of my close friends. By the way, shout out to you, Mark, if you're watching this. He had said that division series win, even though the Yankees won in
it was
5
the
games,
worst thing that might have possibly happened to them.
Yeah,
I kind of agree with you.
It should have gone 5 games because the Yankees was such a better team, but the fact that they struggled against a Guardian team so much, he said he was like that was kind of the warning sign that
could have been.
Nobody.
I think the warning sign was all of the second half of 2022. Honestly, I think that was the true warning sign.
But here's the other thing. You talk about they kind of their offseason last year was so focused on retaining Judge, and part of me wonders if the fact that it took them so long to finally come to an agreement with Judge, and because they had to hold all of their cards and all of their cash so close to their vest to ensure that they had enough to cover him, it makes you wonder if they had gotten a deal done earlier with Judge, would they have been more inclined to shell out money to keep Andrew Benintendi, which would have solved their left field problem on paper and theoretically.
A lot of this Yankee team has a lot of things on paper.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Guys, I'm sorry for this. I really am. Robertson to Miami, Marcano to Milwaukee, Scherzer is in Texas now. This is going bad. Verlander Astros again. Tommy fan, Diamondbacks fan. Cohen speaks, and damn, Mets fans are getting real bad. Yes, kids, the Mets just started the fire sale as the fans get turning while the team is burning. Anthony, what are the Mets doing? Your thoughts on all of this?
Wow. No, hang on a second. Anthony, we got to give a round of applause for that. That was impressive.
You know what? No, I'm not even angry as a Mets fan. I'm actually impressed. I mean, that is the closest to Piano Man himself as we're going to get. And being able to tie baseball home to it as well.
And that's actually one of my favorite Billy Joel songs. So, Rabbi, again, well done.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I definitely have that on my phone. I listen to it at least twice a week, considering I have a terrible commute. But the Mets, you know what? I have to say this. The Mets are probably the smartest team because they realized that this team was not good and they needed to do something about it. You look back to the month of June, 7-19. The pitching ERA was well over 5. The bullpen was a mess. And you look at this team from the moment Edward Diaz suffered a freak injury in the World Baseball Classic, that nothing went right for this roster. Verlander, Quintana started the season on the IL. Soja didn't look good at some starts, not so good in others. The offense, even when they were scoring runs, couldn't get enough solid pitching. The starting pitching, being a major reason the Mets were in holes, was down in games early on, and after and Cohen just looked at this team and realized that rather than being stuck as being a middling team, that they decided to just blow it up and even eating money in the process. I mean, Soja was moved to Texas. The Mets are going to eat up, $36 million?
I believe I heard this story. I don't remember offhand, but I believe the Mets, what they owe to other players is at least a higher salary than 10 teams payroll.
It's the entire payroll of the Oakland Athletics. Let's just be 100% honest.
That doesn't really mean anything to me.
But the Mets they decided to invest in a farm system, and yes, they got two of the Rangers' top 2 prospects. They got the Astros, a couple of their top prospects.
Steal my thunder, Anthony. Don't steal my thunder here.
No. I won't name names. I'll leave that up to you. But the Mets just waved the white flag in a situation where they realized that it was the right thing to do. And obviously, I've been to enough Mets games this season to see the product on the field, and there was something missing with this team when you compare it to last year, when even though they lost the division in the end to the Atlanta Braves, for much of the season, this is a team that believed that they're going to go out there, they're going to win. There was some camaraderie there. There was just something was missing, and I'm quite sure the SNY guys pointed it out as well. There was something just not there, and at the front office, credit to them, they saw that they decided to let's move in another direction. Um, Not exactly what Cohen wanted to do with the money that he spent in the offseason, trying to improve on a team that won 101 games. But this is the right step. I mean, you look at some of the younger players. Beatty got to a decent start, but he struggled and has been sent back down to the minors. Francisco Alvarez, for a couple of months, a good solid stretch, was the Mets' best player, especially when Peter Alonso was on the lineup. So I think the front office looked at that and looked at the underachieving performance of some of the guys that they moved, and also like the Tommy Phams and David Robinsons of the world. They were all 1 year deals, so it was a smart move to move those contracts as well. But with Soldier and Verlander, they were supposed to be the leaders of a rotation to get the Mets over the top. And obviously, Verlander coming back from an injury, he struggled. Did pitch better. His last few starts with the Mets. Soldier was just inconsistent all season. Victimized by the home run ball nonstop. His velocity was down. The slider looked like a bad practice pitch at times.
What's
But
funny about
overall,
Scherzer is Scherzer was essentially every issue that people had with Garrett Cole as a Yankee
yeah,
in terms of his possible drops in velocity and giving up the home run ball up until really this year.
yeah, and the best way to shed $100 million in salary, so it wasn't the total end of the world, but the Mets. I mean, they'll probably look at now and has the smartest team at the trade deadline. They didn't go into this false sense of we can still make a run. They just said, look, we've had 3 months to look at this team. We're not going in the right direction. Let's start over. Let's build from scratch. And when you look at the Mets roster now, free agency, you make a couple of smart decisions as far as the pitching staff, and this is a team that can still make a run at a wild card in 2024. So it's not out of the possibility that the Mets can continue again next season. But as far as this year, I mean, the smart decision was to bite the bullet and to move some pieces and to get back and try to replenish a farm system that became virtually bare bone after a couple of years.
Yeah, the one thing I think is actually really funny when thinking about what this team has been through with the expectations. One thing that that I want to kind of bring up right now is when you are on the hot seat, and I don't think Billy Epler is long for this area in terms of being a general manager, just based on the inactivity he did in terms of last year's deadline. Are you really allowed to just remake your team? I mean, unless you get the owner's permission. And does that buy him some time? That's kind of sort of more of a general rhetorical question of this whole thing. And that's something I'm very interested to see. I think they've said Buck is safe in this whole thing. I think Buck would probably leave before he would get fired just because he has very little time to go through rebuilding. But Jay, as you were about to say,
done it before, by the way.
He's done it before, but I think it's a lot of work to go through. But Jay, you mentioned the Mets farm system has gotten a huge upgrade over these last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Cohen said that, when Steve Cohen bought the Mets, he had two mandates: win a World Series in the first 3 to 5 years of his ownership. Something I think he's recognized may have been an expectation a little too high to reach in that time frame, and rebuild the Mets farm system into something akin to what the Dodgers have done, so that the Mets can be sustainable contenders. That second mandate was the driving force behind every trade the Mets made on deadline day, as well as the period leading up to it. Did he go about it in the way most owners would? No, of course not. Have you met Steve Cohen? But doing it his way is what got the Mets the prospects they were looking for with their deals. especially the ones for their very expensive, almost 40-year-old co-aces. The Mets turned Max Scherzer into infield prospect Luis Angel Acuna. Yes, the last name should sound familiar. He's the younger brother of Braves All-Star Ronald Acuna. Cohen agreed to cover roughly $36 million of Scherzer's salary in order to get that trade done. The Mets turned Justin Verlander into outfield prospects Ryan Clifford and Drew Gilbert. Those three are arguably the Rangers and Astros best position player prospects. Cohen agreed to cover $35 million between Verlander's 2023 and 2024 salaries, and if Verlander's 2025 option vests, $17.5 million more is Cohen will cover, and he did all that to get that trade done. But he didn't stop there, as the Mets traded Tommy Pham, Mark Canha, and Dominic Leone, getting 3 more prospects in return. In each deal, Cohen covered more money, about $82 million to enhance his farm system when it was all said and done. Right-handed pitcher Justin Jarvis, who came over from the Brewers in the Canha deal, along with some cash. Infielder Marco Vargas and catcher Ronald Hernandez came over from the Marlins in the David Robertson deal. And shortstop Jeremiah Jackson, who came over from the Angels for Dominic Leone and cash, are all intriguing prospects. But I'm going to focus on the 3 who came over from the Rangers and the Astros, as they're considered the crown jewels of the Mets prospect haul. Let's start with the younger Acuna. The consensus among several evaluators points to him becoming an above-average player. He doesn't possess the power of his older brother, and overall, the comparisons to him seem patently unfair, as the brothers are 2 different types of players. Scouts have said things ranging from he's going to be a really good big leader to he often had the most tools and was the most athletic player on the field, but rarely was he the best player. The potential comps for Acuna start at Josh Harrison with a ceiling of Ozzie Albies. Not bad. At 5'8" and 180 pounds, one scout said, Acuna looks undersized, but said he's, quote, a dynamic up the middle player with an enticing power speed combination. The ball jumps off his bat, but he's aggressive and needs to continue to improve his strike zone awareness and get better at consistently lifting the ball, end quote. He has the speed part down already. 46 stolen bases this season, the 3rd straight year he's reached that mark in the minors. The Mets like Acuna's arm strength and intend to start him at shortstop at AA Binghamton. He can also play second base and center field, and he will get looks at both spots once he finally settles in upstate New York. One scout said that he thought Acuna as a shortstop in 2022 was a stretch, but others say he's improved, and one went so far as to label him as a good defender. At number 58, Acuna was the Mets' only newly acquired player to crack the midseason top 60 prospect list compiled by the Athletics MLB scouting guru Keith Law. He was previously unranked. How did he make the jump? Well, as one scout said, quote, Acuna is a very likable prospect. A year from now, he can be a real dude. He's not one yet. He's a good one, but it's not like a wow kind of guy yet. This time next year, Acuna can be an untouchable guy, end quote. The Mets can only hope. Outfield prospects Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford, who came over in the Verlander deal. While Acuna owns the best midseason ranking, and Gilbert's name carries plenty of buzz as a 2022 first-round pick, some scouts say Clifford may be the best of the 3 prospects. As a corner outfielder, Clifford flashes occasional plus power, which is scout lingo for his ability to hit a ball really hard, really far. The power tool carries more than an overall hit tool, the scouts say, though. In the eyes of another evaluator, the plus power makes Clifford a future decent regular. But the evaluator also labeled the 6'3", 200-pound left-handed hitter as a slow twitch, so he has that means he has the potential to struggle with good velocity. For Clifford, who may eventually become a first baseman, the talent has all long been there, despite where he went in the draft. To pry him away from his commitment to Vanderbilt, the Astros gave Clifford a $1.256 million signing bonus after selecting him in the 11th round of the 2021 draft. He slashed .291, .399, .520 across both A-ball levels this season. In addition to Clifford's power upside, most of which appears to be pull side, but his ability to collect hits in either direction should help him advance. Another evaluator liked how he made adjustments to plate while advancing level, saying, quote, Clifford has a high baseball IQ, and you can tell he's played a lot of baseball for his age, impressive presence and demeanor, end quote. Gilbert projects as more of a complimentary everyday player than a superstar, according to one scout. Industry rankings, for the most part, have pegged the former Tennessee outfielder and first-round pick as Houston's best prospect. Some around the Astros believed he could have been a September call-up, but there are those outside the organization who are not fans. According to one scout, Gilbert is, quote, fool's gold. I've had other scouts say the same thing, end quote. That scout did, however, pointed out to some stiffness and struggles during his stretches at AA, where Gilbert did struggle at the start, but he did rebound just before the trade deadline. Some of the split opinion, according to another scout, may come from Gilbert's size. He's only 5'9", 195 pounds. So there's some tweener risk with the idea that he may not be a true center fielder or even a corner outfielder to cement himself at either spot. Still, the consensus is that he's a high-energy player with plus speed and solid defense, coupled with a good combination of a hit tool and the ability to hit for some power. While another scout evaluating Gilbert as follows. Here's the quote. Gilbert is advanced at the plate. He has a good swing, decisions, and makes contact. The power unlock is still in progress, but he's a hard worker, and the more he adjusts to the professional level, I'm sure there's more in the tank, end quote. He also said that he has a plus arm for an outfielder. Clifford's going to head to High A Brooklyn, while Gilbert will join Acuna at Double A Binghamton. Bottom line, are the Mets done acquiring prospects? I doubt it. I have a feeling that mandate will be in play as long as Cohen owns the team. And despite the unorthodox way he went about his first foray into prospecting, pun intended, I think it qualifies as an initial success. But as for long-term success, which is what Cohen is looking for, only time will tell.
He goes into prospecting many different ways. I'm sure there's been many different times he's been searching for gold in his entire business career. Yeah, I'm impressed with the way the Mets had the assets to get rid of and to deal into contenders. Houston and Texas needed arms. They're in their own arms race right now. They're going to be competing for a division championship and a likely number 2 seed in the AL playoffs. And I'm perfectly fine, although be it the Mets are 7 games out of the second wild card, of the Yankees are 5 games out of the second wild card. Just saying. But all I have to say is this. I'm not sure what that... I don't like the... They didn't really concede for 2024, but it came out that Max Scherzer basically said I was willing to waive my no trade clause because Cohen could not guarantee putting together a championship contender in 2024. And then Cohen the next day, basically in an interview, pretty much confirmed what Scherzer had said, whether it be because he had to, kind of, or because of the cap being let out of the bag, or he wanted to. That's perfectly fine. But they could be a wild card contender next year, but to kind of give like not the secret of the success away, but to kind of give the game plan away when there are free agents coming out this upcoming offseason. And I think there's one who's coming in from California who probably
not coming here.
Teams. He's not coming here now, that's for sure.
He was never coming here.
And you don't know anything. Honestly,
he was never coming here.
You say that
wanted to come here. He would have come here out of the gate from Japan because both New York teams had the ability to throw more money.
They did.
The Angels did, and they did. And he said,
I will never say never on anything anymore in sports. I'm just saying. I will never guarantee anything in sports. But all I'm saying is, in a league where the only 2 real constants right now in terms of teams year to year is Atlanta and Los Angeles, I feel like there's a lot of volatility for everybody else. I thought that the Mets could have done an easy Yankees circa 2016 makeover, get the prospects that they can, and kind of reload for next year when they were 1 win away from a World Series. But we'll see what happens with this team in the near future. I think they still have a murky future in both leadership positions, GM and manager. The revolving door manager kind of needs to stop for this team because if it continues to go on, that's going to be a big problem because manager in baseball is, in my opinion, the biggest spot in any sport, but that's just my opinion. We'll see what goes on in the future, but I'm not a big fan of waving a white flag or even a semi-white flag for 2024 when you can make a year-to-year jump. Just remember, be it the AL's second wild card is 13 games over 500. The NL's second wild card is Miami, which we'll get to in a second, Che, who is a whopping 4 games over 500.
I mean, look, here's the thing about Steve Cohen. And, the thing that he also said was, look, I'm competitive. So I don't think he's throwing up a white flag.
I don't think he's throwing up a white flag, but I wouldn't have said that
Off-white
sign
towards beige. But obviously the big concern is, for guys whose contracts are up after next season, obviously the big elephant in the room, actually the big polar bear in the room being
big polar bear.
And I'll tell you, I will say this, even if, and I think part of, and I'm just reading between lines that may or may not be there, but it's just my take on it, is that him dialing back on the expectations for the team and him dialing back on how much he'll dive into, throwing money at free agents. Maybe that's the free agency thing. Maybe him saying he's going to, they may not go as hard after them is so that he can keep that money to potentially re-sign Alonso, because I think he knows that bare minimum, he needs Alonso. Lindor's already signed through, Nimmo's signed through, but he needs Alonso along with those two guys because you need to have a solid, stable veteran core that's going to still be in their primes if you're shooting to really go, dial it back up for starting in 2025.
Funny thing is, by the way, that team has 2 Rookie of the Year candidates because Sega has proven he can probably lead a rotation as the 3rd best ERA right now in the National League. And Alvarez was probably a leading Rookie of the Year candidate for a good amount at the beginning of 2023.
And just remember this, they got to win Diaz back next year too.
That is true. And that probably, honestly, and Anthony knows, probably cost them a few games here or there this year with their bullpen issues. By the way, all of that, Anthony is still 6-4 this year at Citi Field. So still above expectations and above average. And he calls it a down year. And he calls it a down year for him too. Fucking humble, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hey, look. There's still some magic left in Good Luck Ant.
I gotta say, you have. I'm not kidding. You have some of the best luck I've ever seen of a fan of any team having the run.
And you know what? And he also takes damn good pictures from some pretty good angles of where he sits.
Absolutely.
I mean, and he posts them to his Instagram all the time. So the day, if Anthony's going to a Mets game, check out his gram the next day. You'll see some pretty good shots of the stadium of Citi Field.
God, I love Citi Field so much. And much more than Yankee Stadium, but that's another story for another time. All right. So, spoiler alert, this is probably a New York less MLB playoffs this year. Again, never going to say never, but thinking it's a good possibility. So, for the teams that are trying to win or are going to win or not, and that might be
going to try to win.
We'll see about that in a second. Let's see what they did at the trade deadline. Jay, who won the trade deadline? The team that's out 3-7 in the last 10 games.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, winning the deadline is obviously subjective because
big time.
It all depends on, what your thought process is going into the deadline. I mean, if you went in, we can make a case that the Mets, won the deadline. They shed a whole lot of salary, and they acquired and they reached their goal of acquiring a haul of prospects to rebuild their farm system. You could say they were winners like that. They're, like I said, it all depends on your perspective. The team that I'm looking at, because they fit what my definition of winning the trade line is the Miami Marlins. They filled needs while some of the teams ahead of them in the NL wildcard race did little to nothing. And Rabbi, you accused me of taking the easy way out when you and I were starting to put this show together since I'm leading off this segment. But the Marlins did what you're supposed to do at the trade deadline. They filled 2 big needs in getting former Mets closer David Robertson, who was 4-2 with a 2.05 ERA and 14 saves for a struggling Mets team, at the time of the trade to improve the back end of their bullpen. And they got former White Sox third baseman Jake Berger, who had hit 25 home runs for a struggling White Sox team to add some power to the lineup. The Marlins also added what they hope will be some complementary / depth pieces to their roster with the acquisition of first baseman Josh Bell from the Guardians, who looked like he could use a change of scenery. Left-handed pitcher Ryan Weathers from the Padres. He was San Diego's 2018 first-round pick, and he has the tools. He just has yet to put it all together. And right-handed reliever Jorge Lopez from the Twins. While some of the other teams ahead of them in the wild card race, the Phillies, the Giants, and the Reds in particular, did little to nothing to improve their situations as we head into the dog days of August, followed by the hunt for October. Robertson steps right into the closer role, moving lefties A.J. Puke and Tanner Scott into setup or more strategic late inning role spots. Robertson has a solid resume as a closer, which I've detailed more than once on this show this year. 2.26 ERA and 34 saves across the past 2 seasons prior to the trade. He's a proven, trustworthy, and capable of slamming the door in the 9th inning. For a Marlins bullpen that ranked 16th in MLB in ERA at the time of the trade and had 6 blown saves in the month of July, this is a definite upgrade. Getting Berger allowed Miami to move, Gene Segura and his 219, 277, 279 slash line, his pathetic 556 OPS, his measly 3 home runs and 21 RBI, and below average glove to the Guardians in the trade that brought them Josh Bell, whereupon Cleveland promptly released Segura, even though it meant eating the remaining money on his $10.5 million contract, which he's owed beyond 2023. The fact that Berger, who is a bit of a feast or famine hitter, his slash line is only 214, 279, 527. He does have an 806 OPS, but he only has 52 RBI to go with those 25 homers, and he has a 31.6% strikeout rate. The reason he's considered a significant upgrade at the hot corner shows you just how bad Segura was for the Marlins. They essentially added the same player, but with the potential for 10 homers for the rest of the way instead of 1 or 2. Upgrade. The acquisition of Josh Bell is interesting to me. Here's a guy who has an All-Star nod and a Silver Slugger award on his resume and 3 seasons where he topped 25 homers and 85 RBI with an OPS of 800 or better. And yet he floundered in Cleveland with only 11 homers, 48 RBI to go with a 233, 318, 383 slash line for just a 701 OPS, despite hitting the ball hard and having expected on base and expected slugging numbers that are much better than his actual. So maybe what he needs is that change of scenery. Miami had gotten a 248, 306, 376 slash line from the first base position prior to the trade, mostly coming from Yuri Gurriel, who has given them just 3 homers and 19 extra base hits total, which makes Bell, on paper anyway, an upgrade. All in all, a positive trade deadline for a team looking to gain ground in the NL wildcard race. Will it get them past the Cubs and the Reds, who they trailed by half a game coming into tonight's action for the 3rd NL wildcard, or even the Giants and the Phillies, who coming into tonight's action they trailed by 3 games for the 1st or 2nd spot? We'll see.
They have that spot, by the way, now. As of today, by the way. Anthony, who lost the trade deadline?
We talked about the Yankees, so they don't technically qualify. They don't qualify as the losers in this segment.
No, they qualify as a snoozer.
Well, I'm gonna go with the Cleveland Guardians.
I'm sorry, you mentioned the Yankees trade deadline. I fell asleep.
Snoozer.
Big time.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go with the Guardians. And here's the thing: the activity. They traded Amar Rosario to the Dodgers to get Noah Syndergaard. How about that? 2 former Mets being traded from one another. They acquired Kyle Manzardo from the Rays for Aaron Clever, and they moved a lot of money off the payroll. The problem is they didn't replace the players in the process. Obviously, Manzardo they're looking at has a long-term solution at first base, but this is a team that just outside of Ramirez, who, by the way, is probably the only winner this week. If you saw the smackdown he threw on Tim Anderson last weekend. But this is a team that is desperate for any kind of power hitting, that they didn't add a bat, and they didn't replace any of the players that they got rid of. Obviously trading Josh Bell made sense because they're shedding salary, $16.5 million. And they got rid of Gene Segura almost immediately after they acquired him. But what they filling the holes at? There's another problem. And the Guardians technically are kind of like the Yankees in a situation where they're kind of stuck in a no man's land. They want to look forward to the future, but here's the thing: they're in a bad division when they're only 3.5 games out of first place. So it's almost like they have 1 foot on the gas pedal and 1 foot on a brake. As far as far as moving forward. And I'll ask you a question. Ask you to my esteemed hosts a question. Does anybody want to win the American League Central? Because
The
No.
Twins want to win the American
No.
League Central. They just don't want to win it pretty.
the Twins are due by the fall. This has been one of the ugliest divisions
Yeah.
I have seen
Hands down.
since, like, I would say this, since 1994, when the American League West, all teams going into that strike was under 500. It was like, if there was anything the baseball strike did, was save us from a team being under 500 and being in the American League playoffs that season. We may actually have that this year because the AL Central has just been so bad. And it's like a total 180 from the American League East where teams are good, they're just beating up on each other. The Central is just a downright dreadful from start to finish. And it's going to be one of the funniest pennant races because we don't know which team will actually win this division. The Guardians didn't do anything as far as putting themselves in position to go for it. The Twins are just sitting there because by the fall, the White Sox became sellers. The Tigers were never in it.
Nope.
This is by far the sorriest division in baseball, and they're gonna have a playoff team that's gonna be playing in October. It is gonna be, like I said, it's not pretty for baseball purists, but for a guy like me who enjoys comedy and a sitcom, this is gonna be popcorn worthy. For the last month and a half of the season.
You like train wrecks, don't you?
Here's the thing.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about this on the show before, and I think, Rabbi, you made this point, that there was a point in the season where every team in the American League East had a better record, even the team in last place, than the team that was in first place in the AL Central. That is no longer the case. The Yankees being off tonight are stuck on 59 wins. The Twins picked up their 60th. So now finally, the AL Central leader has a better record than the last place team.
I actually have the standings for technically the same winning percentage. So
technically,
that's not 100%.
59 and 55 for the Yankees, 60 and 56 for the Twins. It's still
59 and 56, 60 and 57. By the way.
There you go.
But it's the same thing. I would say though that the AL for two things. Number one, just be careful because the 2006 Cardinals were only 5 games over 500 and did win the World Series. So
hey, look at the Phillies last year. All you got to do is get in, and anything can happen.
Never say never. And also, at least the AL Central. But also, can I finish my line, guys? Jesus Christ. Also,
2006. That hurts, okay?
I know. I'm just saying that's the best example. I know it's a terrible, but also the AL Central packs the punch. All right, let's continue on here and quickly talk about the loser of the team that I had. I was originally going to talk about said Phillies, by the way. Would have been a great transition. And how they didn't really do a lot at the trade deadline and how they kind of need to prepare. They're going to probably be in the postseason because they performed above expectations, but they need to hit. But Anthony mentioned something, and I got to bring it up as my team. What the hell are the San Diego Padres doing? This is a team that around July 28th had a half a game better record than the Mets did. Only a half a game. And they decided, let's not only stay put with a team that is young and you can get people. Oh no, they went in again. Did they keep Blake Snell and Josh Hader, who are pending free agents? You're damn right they did. Did they also give up more prospects from their farm system for stars like Rich Hill, Ji-Man Choi, Garrett Cooper, and Scott Barlow? Oh, you're damn right they did as well. Yeah, the Padres, they also even tried to get Justin Verlander. Because why not have a million pitchers out there, even after Joe Musgrove did end up this season. And they also happened at the worst possible time because right around the trade deadline, they swept the Texas Rangers and thought they had a chance. Well, they went into a 4-game series against the Dodgers, and they got pretty much shellacked by a total of 10 runs, losing 3 of 4. And then in a 2-game series with Seattle, they managed 7 hits in 18 innings. Yes, They are baseball's best defensive team. They have the top ERA, but they are 6-18 in one-run games. They have lost 10 straight games and have gone to extra innings. There is no identity with this team whatsoever. There is no hustle with this team. There is no heart with this team. And what do they say the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Maybe that season again, that series against the Dodgers last year where they won in 4, maybe that tried to change their directory and thought everything is going the right way. It's not. They're closer to the Pirates in being down than they are to the final wild card, which again are the highly 4 games over 500 Marlins as their 5.5 back of that. People have said if they get into the playoffs, they're going to be dangerous. They got to get into the playoffs first. And honestly, whatever the Padres experiment has been over the last few years, it's gotten you 1 win in the National League Championship Series. Give up. Seriously. Give up.
Their lack of anything surprised me because it's AJ Preller.
No, they got more people and they have one of the worst farm systems in all of baseball. It's ridiculous.
It's eventually going to come back to bite them in the
ass. It's biting them now. They're 5 games under 500 with no future. I mean, in their team they have future, but they have no prospects. 1 injury and they are truly 100%
screwed.
Either way.
And the worst part of all that, they had a chance to move Juan Soto and kind of replenish some of that farm system and chose not to.
Even just the players that I mentioned, moving Snell, moving Hader, in a season that's lost, you could have gotten something, and they didn't. Finally tonight, going into this writing, the Orioles. Yes, the Orioles have the best record in the AL, second best in the league, only 2.5 back of the Braves. However, in a stunning development this week, they played the Astros in a series of 3 games where the Astros won 2, and I was rooting for the Astros. Why, you ask? In a story coming from awful announcing on Monday night, we realized that the Orioles, copyright Dennis Green, RIP, are exactly who we thought they were. As they suspended announcer Kevin Brown, they technically demoted him.
They didn't call it a suspension. They
technically, yes, they took him off the air. They actually technically demoted him to radio for 1 series, but go with me here. Go with me. You want to trust the Orioles brass on anything? I think I have the right to actually supersede what the facts are from their side of the ball. So Kevin Brown, not the pitcher, obviously. I hate his guts, by the way, for 2004. Kevin Brown said the heinous crime of mentioning how the Orioles record was terrible the previous 3 seasons in Tropicana Field in Tampa, winning as many games this season going into that game as he did the previous 3. John Angelos, ladies and gentlemen, Orioles owner and skin as thin as the paper this paragraph would have been written on 10 years ago. Anthony, why the hell?
I was at the Mets Cubs. I was at the Mets game Monday night, and you sent me the text, and you sent me the text. I watched the clip, and what was I supposed to ask you?
What the hell? What did he say wrong? And it's what everybody has said since they watched it.
Yeah, I was saying, like, wait, did he say the offensive? What exactly was the cause?
He said the words, "It's been a minute," and that's it. That's not even offensive.
He was literally doing his job. He was giving a backstory to the Baltimore Orioles struggles playing down in Tampa. I'm looking at this. This is the same family, the family that fired the great John Miller back in 1996. I didn't literally do my research and remember, like, wait a minute, the same family did this also. How do like?
I'm gonna get into that.
And it's unbelievable. And Gary Cohen said it perfectly when he talked about that this boneheaded move took the focus off a team that has been playing well. They're playing great baseball. They're in first place. They have some really good City Connect uniforms, by the way. I really dig those things. The only thing they needed was a tribute to Omar from The Wire. It would be absolutely perfect.
So
Than that, I just could not believe this. And I'm old to remember, I've seen this before. Remember Marv Albert being fired from MSG Network because James Dolan being thin-skinned and seeing him criticize the Knicks being poorly ran. No, it's literally his job. Unless you are Stevie Wonder, but I can see when the Knicks are being badly mishandled during the Scott Layland era. We all saw it. All Marv Albert was doing his job. In the case of Kevin Brown, he's doing his job. He's talking about the Orioles' struggles the last few years. You want to get mad at anybody? Get mad at your team for underperforming, but they're going to chop a can of Phil. How about that? Literally everyone. Al Michaels is right. The guy who thought it was a good idea to suspend the guy should be suspended. This is probably one of the dumbest things to be reprimanded for a job I have ever seen. And I've seen broadcasters put their foot in their mouth, say something dumb, say something offensive, even as much as be too much like cheerleaders, which I always accuse local broadcasters of doing too much of sometimes. And what made the Yes Network team, especially when they have David Cole or even Paul O'Neill on the broadcast so good, and sometimes Chris Singleton filling in for Michael K, is that they will call the Yankees out when things aren't going so well. They're not being punished. The SNY crew, they have had. We saw last year Gary Cohen call on Buck Martinez for having Musgrove check when the Mets were being dominated and gave them a wild card series. He was not reprimanded. That is a broadcaster's job. They call it like it is, and they try to. And look, that's what we do. Okay, we try to do what we do. We call for what it is. We are fans of the teams, but at the same time, we have to call them out for what they are. And we called out the Yankees for being a middling team. We called out the Mets for being an underachieving, overpaid bunch. All Kevin Brown did was do exactly what he does. His job.
Was on a graphic, by the way. It was literally on a graphic that was put there that he was explaining.
Did they suspend the guy who put the graphics together? This was
they probably fired him and threw him in the water. It's the Angelos.
This was the stupidest thing. The stupidest thing I have seen in a very, very long time as far as broadcasting 101, as far as team management 101, as far as very thin-skin ownership 101. This is ranked up there. We gotta bring this up on our year-end show. Has a WTF moment because
I'm so
flabbergasted by this sort of event, and I'm happy that the broadcasters across the sports united in saying what the fuck. And I curse. I don't do it often on the show, but this was a main exception.
Yeah, if ever there was a call for Anthony to use the actual Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, this is it. Look, the Baltimore Orioles are one of the longest tenured franchises in Major League Baseball history and one of the more successful. But in a season that has seen them rise from the ashes of some horrible 100-loss baseball over the last few years to the top of the AL East, a season that should be all about one of the best turnarounds in the game, we are forced to remember that the ownership of this team, which started with the father and has continued with the son, is one of the most petty in all of baseball. Look, it'd be one thing if what Brown read during the game was something he found on his own, injected into the broadcast, though even that would be stretching the grounds of credulity for his suspension. As I said, yes, the Orioles are saying it's not a suspension, even though he has not done a TV broadcast since July 23rd. He's due back tomorrow. But he was, as you guys alluded to, he was reading off notes provided by the Orioles game day staff and put up as a graphic by the broadcast production team. And that stat showed a positive, as you guys said, how the Orioles had gone from being a team that the Rays beat up on at the Trop, 3-18 road record from 2020 through 2022, to turning the tables on their AL East opponent this season, taking it to them in their house, winning 3 of 5 at that point. How anyone could interpret that as Brown alluding to the Orioles as being a penny-pinching organization, even though they do have the game's 29th best payroll, or the stat being a knock on their current performance, is beyond me. But petty, insecure little men named Angelos have been running this team for decades now. This is a team that actually has rules against mentioning former players on the air. Yep. The entire thing brought back memories, and Anthony alluded to this, of Peter Angelos, the father, running former Orioles play-by-play man John Miller out of town because Miller was critical of the team when he saw mistakes being made and wasn't enough of a homer for the team on his broadcast. Here's Angelos's quote about that. They should be an advocate for the team. They should bleed a little bit for the Orioles. Oh, and rumor has it, when Angelos wasn't happy about Miller being part of ESPN's national broadcast team, which limited him to only calling about 125 Oriole games a season. Hey, Pete, how'd that turn out for you? Oh, yeah, Miller landed on his feet in San Francisco and has been calling Giants games his way for the last 27 years and recently received a baseball broadcaster's highest honor, the Ford C. Frick Award from the National Baseball Hall of Fame. I have to say, I agree with you, and I absolutely loved how other broadcasters on other teams called little Johnny Angelos, and I'm saying it like this because his actions are childish, called him out for this nonsense. Jason Benetti of the White Sox, David O'Brien of the Red Sox, Tom McCarthy of the Phillies, Dan Schulman of the Blue Jays, all denounced what happened to Brown. Here in New York, Michael Kay, as Rabbi told me, started this out on his radio show, but continued doing it on the Yankees TV broadcast, along with his colleagues in the Yankees radio booth, John Sterling and Susan Waldman. All three of them called the Orioles out for this. And how cool was it, guys, that the TBS broadcast team let their audience hear Oriole fans chanting "Free Kevin Brown" during the 7th inning of Tuesday night's Orioles-Astros game. But Anthony alluded to it, and I'm going to say this. I have the actual quote here. I don't think anyone nailed how the rest of the baseball broadcasting fraternity felt about this nonsense more than Mets play-by-play man Gary Cohen did when he said during the 4th inning of the Mets-Cubs game Monday night, quote, "Let me just say one thing to Baltimore Orioles management. You draped yourself in humiliation when you fired John Miller, and you're doing it again. And if you don't want Kevin Brown, there are 29 other teams who do."
Yeah, there's nothing left to say other than this is what small-time organizations and teams with very, very petty owners. I'm not even going to mention the sins of Peter Angelos, baseball sins, not real sins. But
we don't have time.
We don't have time, but here are a couple of things that John Angelos has done over his tenure taking over from his father. Still alive, but in very failing health. It is mid-90s now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to negotiate for a new stadium, by the way, as teams do every 10 or 15
years. Oh, yeah, I read about this.
Baseball. And they're trying to build on 3 public lots. And they've also suggested that the Orioles not pay rent on a park under a new lease. So they're having issues with that. Oh, also, they also fired a very long-time announcer. I think Anthony and Jay, you should know him very well, Gary Thorne and Jim Hunter, his broadcast partner back in 2020. They were with the team for
decades.
Thorne for 13 years, Hunter pretty much for 25. They fired their former public address announcer for tweets, Ryan Wagner, in 2021. No one could actually find any insulting tweets. And his last comment was he was excited to be back in the best ballpark in baseball with fans. Oh, and then here's a comment made about the team future in Baltimore, and I'm going to say this word for word. You can find any garden variety high value sports team or involvement. You're always going to have some controversy, but I've been a very outspoken, I'm very transparent. In fact, I would invite you and all your colleagues next week, not on Martin Luther King Day. You can come back in this building, you can meet me in this office. Really? Can't say that because you're making no. And also, he also, believe it or not, Peter Angelos did not want John to have the team. He wanted his brother Lou to have the team.
I read about this too. This is
and
hilarious.
Basically, he tried to take control of the father's estate while excluding Lou. This is being in This is a lawsuit in court.
Lawsuit.
I don't remember if this ever actually got done, but they also claimed in 2019 John Angelos ordered former Orioles outfielder Brady Anderson fired as an effort to remove people who would oppose his actions. He spent basically his entire career in Baltimore was vice president of baseball operations. So I've learned that not only is this just a long line in history of the Angelos family, but John Angelos himself is now coming to light as a complete and utter shagoff.
I would say this too. Baltimore, if they don't want Kevin Brown, hey, look, the Yes Network, SNY, even whatever, New York will welcome him. There are 29.
He's going to be somewhere else probably once his contract is done in Baltimore.
You know what? He has even if he doesn't last much longer in Baltimore, he has a very bright future ahead of him.
You know what?
And he's a national announcer too for ESPN as well, so he does work also.
Yeah, by the way, I was just about to say that. Like, I would love to see him do a playoff series just to spite the Baltimore Orioles, just because it's the pettiest thing I've ever seen. I'm like I said, if Baltimore don't want him, 29 other teams, so walk the red carpet for him.
Mm-hmm.
Including the Mets, Gary Cohen, but obviously you're not getting rid of
No. Hey, the kid broadcaster did pretty well, by the way, and he didn't get kicked out of the broadcast booth.
Well, I mean, you can make fun of the Mets all you want if you're a kid broadcaster. You're a kid. Anyway, it's time to sleep it go. For Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, I'm Steve Rabinowitz. YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines on demand, where you can find this. Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines, where we'll give you more information about future shows, and once in a while get this damn show up live there. And Jay,
our Twitter, and I'm still calling it Twitter because I refuse to use this. Our Twitter handle is at ONTH Sports Lines, where you will find a link to this show tomorrow at some point, and check it out from time to time. We post interesting little nuggets related to sports that we think are worth your while to take a look at, give a read to, or just find interesting.
I was going to say X marks the spot on our next show, but I guess that probably isn't the right words to use after that. Anyway, we'll do our college football preview on the next show, and everything that is good and holy about the beautiful non-conference realignment of the last year of college football.
So we're gonna try and keep the focus on the field, just so we're not ranting and raving about what's going on off it.
We might still do that anyway, because that's how the world is. Anyway, enjoy your hot takes. We'll see you next time on the Sports Lines. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.